Do you avoid carbs because you're a spineless sheep that just floats with the wind and does what everybody else is doing? Well, tune in to see why you need carbs, why you need them when you're lifting weights, and why you need to explain to your clients they need them too. Okay, welcome back to the Personal Trainer Playbook. And today is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because, full disclosure, I am a full-blown carbaholic. I love bread probably more than anything in the world. This picture here to me is my personal version of heaven. I went from 6 to midnight just looking up bread pictures online. I know that's kind of insane to think about. But as a young child, my parents would take me to the Italian sub shop to get cold cuts and meat for the rest of my family, and I would walk around picking out the most beautiful, luscious Italian baguette I could find, eat just the bread, none of the meat, and go along with the rest of my day as happy as a pig in shit. So those are my biases. You know those off the bat. I love carbs, but what I'm going to tell you now is also the truth about carbs, why you need them, why they're important for lifting weights, and why you need to dispel the notion to your clients that carbs are somehow evil or inherently fattening or part of an unhealthy lifestyle. So let's jump right into it because I want to talk about this subject as much as I possibly can. So first of all, what exactly are carbs? Very simply, from a chemical perspective, they are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen molecules in this chemical formula here. So both carbs and fats are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Protein also has a nitrogen group, which makes protein a little bit different, which makes it a little bit harder to break down. And it also is why it releases heat when it is broken down because of that nitrogen group. But really, in its simplest form, that's what carbohydrates are. They come in different forms. So there's what's called simple sugars, which is going to be monosaccharides. So saccharide is the individual sugar unit. Again, sugar. I'm going to come back to that in a second. The individual sugar unit is called a saccharide, and the simple sugars are mono, meaning one saccharide, and disaccharide, meaning two saccharide units, so two sugar units. Those are the simple sugars, the quote unquote bad sugars. You'll hear that phrase constantly. But all that means is that those molecules, those chains of sugars can be more easily broken down because there's fewer of them. There's only one or two. Then you've got more complex carbohydrates, and these carbohydrates have longer sugar molecules. So oligosaccharides, polysaccharides, which includes starch and fiber, those are going to be anywhere from 3 to 10 or 10 plus strands or strains of that sugar molecule. That's what makes them digest slower. That's what makes them a little bit harder to break down. That's what's going to give you that slower energy or that more sustained energy that you're looking for from complex carbohydrates. And then finally, you've got glycogen. So the most simple form of, there's the saccharides, and of the saccharides, a single saccharide, one of them is glucose. Glucose is what's in your blood sugar. That's what blood sugar is. It's glucose. And when that glucose is stored in your body, it's stored as something called glycogen. And all glycogen is a row or an array of glucose molecules stacked together, kind of like water and ice. If you picture water as glucose and ice is glycogen. So ice is the stored form of water. Glycogen is the stored form of glucose. So in order for your body to use that glucose, it needs to break it down from the glycogen that it's stored as, and then it can go ahead and be used for energy in the body. Okay, that's all the chemistry we're gonna cover today. But I want to make something really clear. All carbs are sugars. All carbs are sugars. All carbs are sugars. Okay, glad I got that off my chest. So, as I said, all carbs, and as you can see here, are sugars. Doesn't matter if they're simple sugars, doesn't matter if they're complex carbohydrates, doesn't matter if they're starch, doesn't matter if it's fiber. They are saccharides that either come 1 or 2 or come 3 to 10. That's what carbohydrates are. So if you hear out there that sugar is the devil, sugar is the reason we are obese, sugar is the reason we're having all these health problems, cardiovascular issues, heart attacks, cancer, just know that is chemically incorrect, because all carbohydrates are sugars, even starch and fiber. Now, are there nuances where the simple sugars can be deleterious to your health if you eat them in excess because of the rise in blood glucose and the rise in insulin levels? Yes, there's some truth to that. But all carbohydrates are sugar. So do not forget that means inherently sugar is not bad for you. We evolved to eat sugar. It's in sweet things like berries that we, a long time ago in a galaxy far away, we were eating those things to sustain ourselves. Our bodies learned to crave it because it gave us quick energy. We still run on glucose. Glucose is the form of energy for your body, particularly your brain. We'll get to that in a second. So I want to get that out of the way first. All carbohydrates are sugar. All right, so now, all right, let's move on to why carbs are important, particularly for anaerobic exercise and strength training. So what is anaerobic work? So anaerobic exercise is exercise that is fueled without oxygen. That's what the anaerobic stands for. Aerobic is oxygen, anaerobic is without oxygen. That doesn't mean you're not breathing, you're not taking in air when you're doing anaerobic work. What it means is, in order for your body to use energy in the form of ATP, there is no oxygen available in that transaction. So it uses glucose, and it uses something called glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose, of glycogen to glucose to supply ATP for your working muscles. This is what's happening when you're lifting weights. You've got the creatine phosphate system, which is essentially handling any work that's taking between 0 and 10 seconds. And after 10 seconds, you're using the glycolytic pathway, which is breaking down glucose for ATP. This is fueled by glucose, which is stored as glycogen, which you get from carbohydrates. You need to get these in your diet in order to save and store the glycogen that is used in this process. If you are on a low carbohydrate diet or a no carbohydrate diet, you will not store as much glycogen, you will not be able to produce as much glucose, and you will not be able to produce as much ATP from this pathway. There are ways you can make this being on a low carb diet. Your body will start to produce ketones as energy sources to create ATP if you are on a low carb diet and you're eating only fat and protein. But it is much slower and it's a much harder process for explosive, powerful exercise, which is what you want to do when you're lifting weights. So carbs fuel anaerobic work. More carbs, more ability to lift heavy weights, run fast, sprint, do all the things that we want to do. If you have more carbs in your system, it makes it easier to do so. Okay, number 2, carbs are protein sparing. Protein should be used for building and repairing tissue and not for energy. So the two main energy sources or macronutrients for your body are carbohydrates and fat. We evolved to eat these. They are the most efficient way to get energy, to actually drive glucose into your bloodstream. And for this reason, we want to use these things to spare protein for what protein it was designed to do, which is to rebuild and repair tissue. You can use protein to produce glucose if needed. This is a process called gluconeogenesis. Your body will resort to this if you are on a low carbohydrate diet and you are not providing enough of the raw materials for your body to make glucose. This is going to come from eating carbohydrates, breaking those sugars down into glucose directly, or storing it in the form of glycogen, which then you can use for later on down the road. Using protein for energy is kind of akin to using the lumber for your house to build a fire if you're cold and you needed it to survive. Yeah, you could do it, but it's kind of going to be a pain in the ass because you have to knock your whole house down. So you'd really just want to find something else to burn a fire with so you can stay in your house and actually be warm going forward. Yeah, that's a stupid analogy, but it actually kind of works. So if you eat more carbs, you will spare the protein for what it's designed for, which is building and repairing tissue, especially muscle tissue, so you can get bigger and stronger. All right, number 3, carbs are inherently anabolic. So what does anabolic mean? Well, you probably heard it with anabolic steroids, but all anabolic means is growth promoting or adding to, growing. The opposite of anabolic is catabolic, which is breaking down or subtracting from. When it comes to muscle tissue and it comes to muscle growth, we want to be anabolic. Now, there's always going to be, a sequence of anabolism and catabolism, muscle growth and muscle degradation. We just want the anabolism to run more frequently than the catabolism. So what are the things that carbs help with in this sense? Well, one of the most anabolic hormones in your body is something called insulin. Insulin is secreted when your blood sugar rises, which is when you eat carbohydrates and you get more glucose in your bloodstream. Insulin then helps shuttle some of that glucose to your working muscles where it needs it, and then also facilitates the storage of glucose as glycogen for when you need it later. So, insulin is inherently an anabolic hormone. It helps promote muscle growth. Now, it does some other things too. It can help promote the storage of of fat tissue as well. So that's something to think about. You're always going to hear about insulin spikes and blood sugar spikes and how they're so bad for you. But in the case of muscle growth, insulin is a much needed hormone. Carbohydrates help stimulate that. The other thing insulin does is its opposite hormone is something called cortisol. Cortisol is more of a stress hormone. Cortisol is blunted when insulin is released. When insulin is lower, then cortisol is elevated. Now, again, there's no such thing as good or bad hormones. They just do different things and have different jobs. When insulin is high, cortisol is low. When insulin is low, cortisol is high. Cortisol being high has a couple of things that are not so great in terms of stress because it's going to make it much more difficult to sleep. It's going to make it much more difficult to grow muscle because cortisol is a catabolic hormone. It breaks down things. So in this case, for the purpose of building muscle through strength training, we want to have elevated insulin levels at times and lower cortisol levels at times, and carbohydrates help facilitate that. Number 4, your brain runs on glucose. Yes, don't make me yell again. That's sugar. So your brain uses 20% of total energy expenditure while you're at rest, and so it's using 20% of that glucose that's going through your body. If you are low carbohydrate, it just makes it more difficult for your brain to get that glucose to get the energy. Is it still going to get it? Absolutely. No matter what, your brain is going to do whatever it needs to do to keep you alive and keep you functioning. So it's going to go to gluconeogenesis and start breaking down amino acids. It's going to break down fatty acids to produce ketones, and you can use ketones to produce ATP for energy. So there are ways that your brain can adapt for a low carbohydrate diet, but that doesn't mean it's optimal. If you give it enough glucose in the form of sugars from carbohydrates, then it will have enough of the energy it needs without having to go to those other options that aren't as efficient and aren't optimal for running your brain. So carbohydrates are good for your brain. Glucose is needed to make acetylcholine, serotonin, and dopamine, which are essential for mood and memory. So these are hormones that are sometimes known as feel-good hormones. I have this more than anyone I can think of. Carbohydrates make you feel good. They put you in a good mood. Now, can that be a dangerous thing because it can lead to overconsumption and overeating? Yeah, it can. But that doesn't mean you have to abstain from them altogether and say all carbs are the devil because they make you feel good. That's not the case. You'll hear very often that sugar acts on the same parts of your brain that crack cocaine does. And there is a little bit of truth to that, but there is no evidence that is addictive in the same way. There are reward pathways in your brain for any types of food, for any types of experience, because you have wired your brain to feel good when you open that candy bar. That's nothing specific to sugar and to carbohydrates. That's just the way that your body reacts to things that you like or that give you pleasure. Okay? So your brain needs glucose. Carbohydrates give you the glucose in the most readily available form. Therefore, carbohydrates are good for your brain. All right, and number 5, in case you're not sold on carbohydrates yet, carbohydrates help you sleep better. Increased insulin, which we talked about earlier, promotes tryptophan uptake, which is a precursor to serotonin, which then converts to melatonin, which you might have heard helps you sleep. When melatonin production increases, that leads to increased sleepiness. And that's one of the reasons people have a harder time sleeping at night is because their melatonin production has been blunted. Either it could be circadian rhythm issues, it could be alcohol, whatever it is. If that melatonin does pace as you get higher and higher as the day goes on, then you're going to have a hard time falling asleep. Carbohydrates help facilitate that. Also, lower cortisol levels, which we talked about earlier. They reduce nighttime stress and they lead to more restful sleep without waking. Higher cortisol levels make it difficult to sleep. Carbohydrates help lower cortisol by increasing insulin. Okay? So, as you have probably seen by now, I love carbohydrates. I love what they do for your body. I love what they can do for you in a strength training setting. I'm just going to put this next picture up just because it gives me a boner, and that's just luscious sourdough bread. And I just want you to enjoy that. So what does this mean for you and your clients? If your clients insist on being on a low carbohydrate diet, that's fine. Do not try to talk them out of it right away, but let them know if they can slowly introduce carbs back into their diet. Could be a banana before they work out, could be some fruit, whatever. It will help them feel better during the workout. They will have better results. And yes, they will probably grow more muscle if they introduce carbs back into their diet. It is not the devil. It is not going to make them fat. For all the reasons we talked about today, carbs are fucking awesome. You should eat more of them. That's it for the Personal Trainer Playbook. Go have a snack.